Shutter speed is one of the three main components of the exposure triangle, along with aperture and ISO. Understanding shutter speed is crucial in achieving the right exposure and capturing the perfect shot. In this video, I'll explain shutter speed and how you can use it to take amazing photos. So, let's dive in. Shutter speed is the amount of time that the camera's shutter stays open when taking a photo. It's measured in seconds or fractions of a second, and the longer the shutter is open, the more light enters the camera and the brighter the image will be. Conversely, the shorter the shutter speed, the less light enters the camera and the darker the image will be. Shutter speed determines how motion is captured in your photos. It determines whether the motion is captured as sharp or blurry. A fast shutter speed will freeze motion, while a slow shutter speed will create motion blur. Most cameras have a range of shutter speeds that you can choose from. Some cameras have a shutter priority mode, which allows you to set the shutter speed, and the camera will then automatically adjust the aperture and ISO to achieve a correct exposure. In manual mode, you have full control over all three exposure settings, including the shutter speed. Typically, shutter speeds range from 1/4000th of a second to 30 seconds. When using a fast shutter speed, you can freeze motion and capture really sharp images. Slower shutter speeds are good when the light is low or when you want to create motion blur. And this brings me on to the more interesting uses of shutter speed, other than adjusting exposure levels. We can use shutter speed creatively to achieve various effects and more artistic looks in your photos. For example, you can use a slow shutter speed to create a long exposure photo of something like star trails or light trails or moving cars. Or you can use a fast shutter speed to capture a water droplet or a ball in midair, say. Or maybe you want to try panning, which involves moving the camera along with the subject's movement to create a blurred background, but a sharp subject. My point is, this is where the fun and artistic creation lies with the technical aspects of photography. So, experiment with different shutter speeds to create uniqueness and variety in your images. It's extremely important to understand that shutter speed is one of the three components of exposure, and changing this will directly affect the other two components, aperture and ISO, in order to maintain a given exposure. For example, a faster shutter speed will require a wider aperture or a higher ISO to achieve a correct or the same exposure. Conversely, a slower shutter speed will require a smaller aperture or a lower ISO to achieve a correct exposure. It's essential to balance these three factors to achieve the correct exposure for your photo. So experiment, practice, and observe what happens when you change the shutter speed, especially when in manual mode. I hope this video has been helpful, and if you've enjoyed it, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel for more photography tips. And of course, don't forget about my podcast where we host some of the best photographers around. Also, if there are any other topics or tutorial subjects you want to deconstruct with me, then let me know in the comments. But until then, thanks for watching, stay curious, happy shooting. Seriously, how many times am I going to say shutter speed?